theme for you. What is it about the theme park that grabs you?
Well, there's a bunch of things about it that make it inherently futuristic. So Disney World in particular is an explicitly futuristic undertaking. You know, Walt Disney wanted to build a planned city. He originally wanted to put it under a dome with its own nuclear reactor, right? Experimental prototype city of tomorrow. So it already is futurism, right? And it's that kind of especially wonderful, goofy corporate American futurism that comes out of the 64 World's Fair and the 39 World's Fair. And it's really that kind of meaty jetpack, food and pellet form futurism that a lot of us have a lot of nostalgia for. But in the age of the internet, it's got a couple of really interesting characteristics. One is that it's very staunchly location-based. So this is both a strength and a weakness, but it's not trivial to replicate Walt Disney World somewhere else, right? Walt Disney World can't be copied over the internet. Walt Disney World is an art form that is staunchly there and physical and present, and you have to make your pilgrimage to Orlando to get to it. It's never going to come over the wire to you. And that's a great strength, of course, because it makes it unique, but it's also a great weakness because many of their competitors have figured out how to do business over the wire without having to have 50,000 employees in a swamp in Florida. Another thing that's distinctive about it in the age of the internet is just how much coordination it takes. So the internet has really lowered coordination costs. You know, we can now make encyclopedias the way ants build hills. This is a remarkable thing. And we can do it because we don't have to pay the tithe to the coordinator that every big public institution until now has had to pay. Every big institution, public or private, has had to pay. So Disney World is all about marshaling a lot of resources and getting them all to march in lockstep, and a certain amount of the energy that they put into the system is frittered away on just making sure everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone's in the right place, everyone's in the right time. They have office buildings full of people who manage a theme park full of people, and then they have office buildings full of people who manage the people in the office buildings full of people, right? The internet doesn't have any of that. And so while it would probably cost about as much as they've had to pour into Disney World over the years to make Disney World, again, to make a new one, to make something that's half as good as Disney World, I have an intuition probably costs about 30%. Right? Because you don't need the coordination. In the same way that you can do 10% of a record label for about 1/10% of the money necessary to do a record label. And not everyone needs 100% of a record label. And here, I think, is going to be a source of a lot of rich conflict in the future, not just for Disney, but as a microcosm for every big coordination-heavy institution, whether it's a TV network, university, a government. I mean, we're already seeing this all over the world in lots of different places. So it's a very juicy subject.
Well, this leads into this question of information sharing, because I think obviously there's a link between what you just said about doing things on the internet and at much less cost, perhaps not getting quite the same effect, but close to it, and your support for information sharing. You feel that very strongly about the fact that information should be shared. And actually, you've written that information sharing started in the Enlightenment and has developed since then, but has come up against obstacles recently, in particular, in terms of the internet. Can you address this a bit?
Sure. So I came at this, like I think a lot of people who are involved in the creative industry, as thinking about the best way for an artist to earn a living. And, you know, Tim O'Reilly, who's the publisher of O'Reilly & Associates, the largest tech book publisher in the world, he says, the problem for most artists isn't piracy, it's obscurity. And certainly, you know, all my books are given away for free the same day they're in shops. And it seems to be selling a lot of books for me because, you know, people treat electronic books as an enticement, not as a replacement by and large. And so long as more people are inspired to buy a book than discouraged from buying a book by the free ebook program, then I come out ahead. So far, so good. But over the years, I've kind of had my consciousness raised on this. And I've come to think that worrying about copyright's future as merely a question about how creative people earn their living or how the supply chain in the creative industries is managed is an incredibly parochial concern, because copying, which copyright law is triggered by, is in the heart of everything we do on the internet, whether it's earning our living or getting our education, staying in touch with our families, getting medical information. All of those things, civic engagement, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, all in one wire, all of it involves copying. And so copyright law has become a kind of super regulation that regulates everything we do. So for example, the Obama administration's trade representative, the U.S. trade representative, has just come back from Seoul, Korea, where he was negotiating the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement. It's a secret copyright agreement that we've seen leaked drafts of. And among other things, it imposes a 3 strikes regime that says that if anyone in your house is accused of 3 acts of copyright infringement without a judge, a jury, a court, or evidence, everyone in the house loses their internet access for a period of time, and their name is entered into a registry of people to whom it's illegal to provide internet access. They've already passed this in France. It's under discussion in the UK. New Zealand's passed it, and so on. Now, imagine what that means, right? So through a form of collective punishment, extrajudicial collective punishment without evidence, without due process, you and everyone in your house loses that lifeline to civic engagement, to education, to your income, to your family. And so now I've come to think that this is not really just a question about the entertainment industry. And in fact, the entertainment industry, although I'm a part of it, is the tiniest part of this question, that this is really a question about what the rules are going to be for our digital lives and our participation in the electronic society. It's about what the architecture of the network will be in the 21st century and whether it will be an architecture of control or an architecture of liberation. And all those questions about whether or not artists are living just seem to be to the side now to me.
Do you think it's a lack of understanding, profound understanding of the sort that you're expressing, and it's a superficial sort of fear? I mean, I do think most people think, and there are artists that have said that it does musicians impinge upon their ability to make a living if this sharing goes on. So it must affect some people.
Well, so that's right, but surely the job of copyright isn't to make sure that the winners in last year's technology lottery never get replaced by the winners in this year's technology lottery. There are lots of artists in every field who are saying, oh, the internet's the best thing that ever happened to me. And just as there were vaudeville artists who were put out of business 70 years ago by the legalization of radio and records, today there are recording artists who are being put out of business and being told that they have to go off and be vaudeville performers. Last year was the best year for performers' income, music performers' income, in the history of the world for live performers. The most money ever brought in by a concert last year. Madonna left her record label, who lose money when the copies are made of her music, and joined a concert promoter who gains money when copies are made of her music. Technology giveth and technology taketh away. In a liberal democracy, government's job isn't to pick the winners.
Okay. I agree. These musicians have now had to go on tour far more, which might be a good thing.
Well, 70 years ago, there were artists who were saying, what do you mean I have to go back into a back room and record?
You're right.
You know, I'm a charismatic, I do something holy. And now you have the successors, the people who put them out of business, saying, what do you mean I have to go on stage? I'm not a trained monkey, I'm a white-collar worker. You know, history changes. Technology picks different winners all the time. Copyright is really the story of technology, because copying is a technological thing. And if different artists are making their living today, then we can feel sad for the artists who aren't, just like I miss the knife sharpener who used to walk down my street with his knife and his bell. And maybe we can even support them with a subsidy or something. But to crush the careers of all the artists who are in the wings, waiting to have an internet-driven career, in order to sustain last year's winners, to me, seems to be profoundly unfair, ahistorical, and ultimately a losing battle.
You make a good case.
Well, thank you.
You are interested in 2 areas, science fiction and computers or gaming, let's put it that way, that are traditionally male, I would say. And yet, in one of your stories that I particularly liked, in your collection, Overclocked, you have a story called Anda's Game, and in which the gamer is a female. And I wonder if you would tell us, was this an intentional act of outreach on your part, or did you just decide to have this character be a girl?
A little bit of both and neither. Really, you know, my wife is a video games professional, and she was the first woman on the British Quake team. She used to play Quake video games for England.
Really?
And she's just a completely badass video games person. And I've outsourced all the video game playing in the house to her. Now, I've just finished a novel that's coming out next May, another young adult novel about global trade unionism, where the organizing takes place in the video games, where the bosses can't spy on them. And it's called For the Win, and it's centered on the factory cities of South China, which are really all women. You know, South China is the only country in the world, or China is the only country in the world where more women commit suicide than men. And generally, women have a very bad deal, except in South China, where, you know, a simple rule of thumb is if you go into a factory and it's not all women working there, it's not a good factory, because the women are the cream of the South Chinese workforce. So it's really a story about women, and it's about women in India, women in Singapore, women in Malaysia, women in China, and women and men in America and those countries as well, but mostly young women organizing a trade union.
Okay, so they're organizing the trade union over the internet. And in Anda's game, though, there's a different sort of group dynamic going on. Could you explain the moral issue quickly, because we're almost out of time,
of course.
which is so interesting in that story, and I think something that a lot of people are not aware of.
So in Anda's game, Anda, who's a young, very avid video game player, finds herself recruited to kill other video game players who don't seem to be very skilled. And over time, she actually discovers that these video game players are what's called gold farmers. This is a job that currently about 400,000 people worldwide do, and it involves doing repetitive tasks in a video game to earn game gold.
Sweatshops of
Sweatshops, yeah, digital sweatshops that are then sold on to rich players who don't want to waste the time it takes to get fancy items or gold or whatever. And she realizes that she's a Pinkerton, and she's actually been hired to destroy the livings of children her own age, girls her own age, working in factories in Central America who are only trying to earn their living too.
Okay, well, it is a fascinating story, and it really raises an issue that I think most people aren't aware of. I want to thank you very much, Cory Doctorow, for being here today. We have a lot more we could talk about, but we're out of time.
Well, thanks, Paula.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.